Hello and welcome to our third presentation of information in regard to the Professional Engineers Registration Act 2019. This presentation is based on documents released by Consumer Affairs Victoria on the 22nd of December 2020, and all of those documents are available from the website you can see on screen. My name is David Hallett. I'm the CEO of the IPWEA Victoria, and by way of background, I spent 6 years on the Architects Registration Board of Victoria and 3 years on the Building Practitioners Board, which gives me some form, I suppose, in terms of the regulation of built environment professionals. This webinar will be recorded and available from our website. Please mute your microphone to eliminate any background noise. Please enter any questions via the chat box. Please send any subsequent questions to vic@ipwea.org. Just to help you step through this, extracts from the original consultation documents look like this slide. That is, they have a blue background. Extracts from the newly updated guidelines and practice note look like the next slide, which is to say they have a green background. What we're going to be looking at is 4 guidelines and 1 practice note. Guidelines on the extraterritorial application of the Act, guidelines on providing professional engineering services, on areas of engineering, on direct supervision, and a practice note on what is a prescriptive standard. We'd also have a look at the role of assessment entities in registration, and we'll have a quick look at a service we're developing with our partner CT Management Group to support councils and other organisations for that matter get ready for the impact of the Registration Act. And just to repeat, new information, so information based on the documents released just before Christmas, look like this slide and have a green background. Now, I mentioned very briefly, we are in partnership with our corporate partner, CT Management Group, looking to develop a service to help councils understand who within their organisations has to be registered, which roles are going to need to be filled by a registered professional engineer within their organisation. I'll speak more about that later, but just in case you're not still around at the end of this show, I did want to make you aware of that. Information will be available from our website and also from CT Management's website, www.ctman.com.au. Now, just to recap, why has the government introduced a registration scheme for engineers? It's quite simple. It's to provide the community and government with some confidence when they're purchasing engineering services from engineers, obviously, from individuals and from organisations. Now, firstly, we'll look at the extraterritorial applications of the Act. This slide is unchanged from the previous version and from the original documents that were circulated for comment. The Act applies to people located in Victoria providing service for Victoria, located in Victoria providing service for outside of Victoria, or located outside of Victoria providing professional engineering services for within Victoria. In each of these situations, the person providing the service must be registered. There's some additional information been released in these pre-Christmas documents, just providing a little more clarity around what in and for Victoria actually means. A professional engineering service is provided in Victoria if the person providing the service is physically located in Victoria when providing the service. It's provided for Victoria if it's provided for a project or a purpose in Victoria, or the service is specifically or connected, related to or connected to Victoria in some way. And it's for outside Victoria if the service is provided to a person or a project in an Australian state or territory other than Victoria. So there's a little more clarity, probably not of great relevance to a lot of our members in local government, but certainly relevant to consultants and contractors across the public works sector. There's also some information provided now about mutual recognition, recognising that engineers in Queensland and also in New Zealand are regulated, and some of which may provide services to Victoria, and likewise engineers in Victoria may provide services to Queensland or New Zealand for that matter. The introduction of this information recognises that there is provision for mutual recognition of registration under the Commonwealth Mutual Recognition Act 1992 and the Trans-Tasman Mutual Recognition Act 1997. So an engineer registered in Victoria, Queensland or New Zealand can have that registration recognised in those other states if required without the need to be reassessed. So again, perhaps not directly relevant to a lot of our members in local government, but certainly relevant to consultants and contractors to the sector. Now, we've said before, the Registration Act has significant implications for individuals and the organisations in which they work. In terms of the individuals, it has implications for their roles and responsibilities, not just for engineering staff, including managers, for outdoor staff as well, perhaps including supervisors, and most importantly, for the registrability of people in currently engineering roles. It has implications on employment agreements, position descriptions, remuneration and compliance costs, and it potentially has implications on your procurement arrangements, whether you're insourcing or outsourcing, and to whom you might be outsourcing in particular. So just to recap and provide some framework for the guidelines, you need to be registered if you meet all of these conditions. One is that you provide a professional engineering service. Two is that the service falls within 5 designated areas of engineering. And 3, your work isn't within one of those 2 exemptions. So you're not working under direct supervision, or you are working to a prescriptive standard. So I'll have a look first of all at the additional information that's been provided around professional engineering service. This slide makes clear the distinction that Consumer Affairs Victoria is now making between professional engineering services and other services that could be provided by engineers. And they're defined by the specialised nature of an engineering service, that being a narrowly defined subset of engineering services which are characterised by the high degree of engineering judgment, knowledge and skill required. The distinction is consistent, according to the guideline, with current practice within the profession, where different categories of practitioners, such as professional engineers and engineering technologists, provide different types of engineering services. So this is the first time we've seen that distinction in these documents. The documents go on to say that whilst professional engineers design, develop and analyse systems, applications and equipment relating to construction, production, operation or maintenance, and that a professional engineer is responsible for applying engineering principles, data and their specialist knowledge of applied science, including physics and chemistry and mathematics to their work, an engineering technologist's responsibility is to adopt and apply the technologies or develop related technologies to create, operate, maintain and improve the systems, applications and equipment originally designed by the professional engineers. So again, it's trying hard, working hard, in fact, to make clear the distinction between a professional engineering service and a service that might be provided by others. While the Act does require professional engineers to be registered to provide professional engineering services, it doesn't require engineering technologists to be registered to provide other engineering services. So that distinction is really important and will help you, certainly help us, determine which roles within an organisation need to be filled by a registered professional engineer. A couple of examples have been provided. We're concentrating on the middle one and the one on right of screen. First of all, in a maintenance setting, makes the point that a professional engineer is responsible for analysing the failure mode of the component or structure requiring maintenance, assessing a range of viable maintenance pathways to address the issue, providing a risk assessment of potential hazards and designing the proposed maintenance activity. A technician, technical officer or contractor undertakes the repair, replacement or modification required to achieve the design parameters set by the professional engineer. So again, trying hard to make a distinction between those 2 roles in a maintenance setting. In a construction setting, again, the professional engineer is responsible for designing the building services required to achieve a specified function, for example, electrical infrastructure, air handling plant and equipment, and fire detection and suppression equipment. By contrast, a project manager or site supervisor, for example, coordinates and directs the various technical specialists as they install and commission components with respect to the design set by the professional engineer. So again, working hard to try to help people understand the distinction between the work of a professional engineer and the services provided by others. Again, some further distinction here, again making the point that service requiring engineering judgment, knowledge and skill is regarded to be a professional engineering service. And some examples there: providing consultation, evaluation, engineering studies, design of engineering works and systems, design drawings, specifications, modelling, simulations, reviews and advice and other technical submission, reviewing this work for the purpose of informing engineering decisions, or assessing proposed modifications that may impact the basis of the design. Professional engineering services don't include responsibility for supervising site conditions, equipment, personnel, or safety in the workplace. However, a professional engineer may undertake these activities. And also making clear that responsibility for deciding whether a particular engineering service is a professional engineering service lies with the person responsible for undertaking that activity. Now, the guidelines on providing professional engineering services haven't changed, but there's been a little more meat put on the bones of each of those four elements, and we'll have a look at those now. First of all, the service must be an engineering service, and the guidelines here have expanded somewhat on the terms engineering and service. Engineering, as we've seen, is the art or science of practically applying knowledge of pure science, such as physics and chemistry and mathematics, to some engineering work. A service is commonly understood to be a particular type of help, work, activity, or skills that someone can offer to others, or that someone performs for another. So the attempt there is to clarify engineering, which other parts of this guideline have done, but also to define what a service actually is. Therefore, an engineering service is an activity or work that is performed for, or a skill that's provided to another person. It requires or is based on the application of engineering principles and data, and is engineering because it is typically performed by an engineer and comprises or applies to the design, construction, repair, or control of engines, machines, electrical equipment, roads, railways, bridges, etc. Where an engineering service is a professional engineering service, the person providing the service must be registered because the service, activity, or work is being provided to another person, that is a client or employer. That means they will need to be registered to provide professional engineering services internally within an organisation as an employee to an employer, including where the organisation is the owner of the property or the asset concerned, and that's particularly relevant for most of our members in local government. Number two, the service requires or is based on the application of engineering principles and data. Again, some additional information provided with the documents regarding judgments, engineering judgments that are required to design, develop and analyse systems, applications and equipment as engineering is concerned with design, construction, production, operation and maintenance. Principles are based on applied science such as physics and chemistry. There's references now to design drawings as well as specifications, standards, application of standards, etc. The use of engineering data may require calculations to be made, and where this is the case, the outcomes of those calculations should be interpreted in the context of the particular system, application, or equipment concerned. Therefore, to be a professional engineering service, a specialist knowledge of applied science is required and the interpretation of engineering data. The purpose is to facilitate the design, construction, production, operation, or maintenance activity relating to engineering, including but not limited to structures, engines, etc. So again, ongoing attempts by Consumer Affairs to help make those distinctions and clarify what is and isn't a professional engineering service. A little more information here. Engineering, construction and production activities now include reviewing designs and coordinating construction, including testing, commissioning where applicable, and production consistent with agreed designs. They include the design and modification of systems and the development of advice to ensure the ongoing operation and standard of performance of devices, equipment, machinery, structures and infrastructure, and now their decommissioning as well. If any of these activities are present, the service is a professional engineering service for the purpose of the Act. And the service to be a professional engineering service is not provided only in accordance with a prescriptive standard. Again, referencing advanced scientifically based calculations, including the science, physics and mathematics calculations that are required to model real-world engineering applications and that combine mathematical theory and practical engineering. So this paragraph's been added to those pre-existing information within the guidelines. Now, some additional information has been included now around certification, and it makes the point, the guidelines make the point that whilst the Act doesn't require a registered practicing professional engineer to sign off or certify on a service, a registered practicing professional engineer may be required to provide certification by a term in a contract, another organisational requirement or a quality assurance requirement, for example, under the ISO 9001 quality assurance standards, or perhaps the requirement of another piece of legislation. If that is the case, where clients, third parties or other legislation requires a professional engineering service to be certified, this must be done by a registered practicing professional engineer. And if several areas of engineering are involved in the service, then more than one practicing professional engineer may be required to provide that certification. So just making the point, it's not a requirement of the Act, but it may be a requirement of some other obligation, and therefore it's wise to be mindful of that. If a registered practicing professional engineer is certifying a service, they must undertake appropriate investigations to be satisfied that the overall service meets the appropriate standards. And of course, they will have to take responsibility for the service being certified. In addition, where the certification is required by other legislation, a registered professional engineer must comply, of course, with the requirements for certification set out in that other legislation. Now, a couple of activity examples have been provided, which are quite useful in helping make that distinction between what is and is a professional, what is and isn't, I should say, a professional engineering service. All of these are important, but we've highlighted a couple in black. First of all, example of activity that is a professional engineering service is providing documentation relating to a professional engineering design or making alterations to an existing professional engineering design or advice. A couple of examples of activities that are not professional engineering services are advocacy on engineering aspects of public and private projects, and perhaps most importantly for a lot of our members, engineering leadership and management roles, which is to say people leadership or people management that doesn't involve specialist engineering judgment or mathematical calculations, those things that define, as we've seen, a professional engineering service. That is a really important distinction that will help you and certainly helps us provide advice as to who within an organisation or at least which roles need to be filled by a registered professional engineer. Now, the 5 areas of engineering that are subject to the Registration Act, we've covered this before: civil, structural, mechanical, electrical and fire safety. And of course, it's civil category that is most relevant to us and certainly to most of our members. The guidelines on civil engineering haven't changed, but a fair bit of information has been provided in support of that broad definition of civil engineering. One of the interesting changes is that in the documents that were circulated for consultation earlier on, there was reference to specialty areas or sub-disciplines, and a couple that were of interest to us were environmental engineering and traffic transportation, road and rail and coastal engineering, which were called up as specialty areas or sub-disciplines of civil engineering. In the updated guidelines, there's reference made to areas of focus or specialty areas, and some of the main areas of focus are listed as of civil engineering are listed as structural engineering, geotechnical engineering, and hydrology engineering. The point's been made that professional engineers providing professional engineering services in any of the above or other areas of focus must be registered in the area of civil engineering. So I guess the message there is that there are more than those three areas of focus. They're provided by way of example, but there are certainly anticipated to be others that are going to need to be considered by engineers when determining whether a person providing a service needs to be a professional registered engineer. So Consumer Affairs has moved away from I guess a prescriptive list into more of a guide, and that's an important guide to be mindful of. Now, moving to the two exemptions, the direct supervision exemption and the prescriptive standard exemption. The exemptions themselves haven't changed, but some more information has been provided to put some meat on the bones, as we said earlier, about what those exemptions actually mean. First of all, the guidelines on direct supervision haven't changed. These are taken from the Act, but for each of those, a little more information has been provided, certainly in most cases. First of all, the provision of direct supervision now includes reference to direct contact, which may be in person. For example, if the supervising registered engineer and the unregistered person work at the same office, or it can be remote if one or both work from home, or if they work in different offices, including an office based outside of Australia or New Zealand. So there's I guess a concession there that in the world we live in, particularly at the moment, remote supervision may certainly be necessary, and these guidelines now make allowance for that, which is certainly useful. There's some reference to or slight updates to the wording of competency and sufficient knowledge. Now the word training has been substituted for the word knowledge, and there's some clarity around that knowledge and experience needing to be within the area of engineering for which someone in supervision role is registered. There's a little more information provided around direction of an unregistered person, that being that they should give ongoing guidance and instruction as required and be in control of the work in the sense of directing the unregistered person to carry out the service. The point is also made here that a supervising registered engineer should not be merely observing the carrying out of the service. They should be giving ongoing guidance and instruction. In terms of overseeing the work of the unregistered person, no change to the guidelines there. And in terms of evaluating their work, again, no change. And also no change to the final requirement, and that is that they must take full responsibility, I should say, for the service that they're supervising. There's no change to the obligations imposed in that the supervising registered engineer must take full responsibility, must keep records, and must not take on responsibility for more unregistered persons than they can reasonably supervise at one time. I thought it was worth emphasising that. And for the unregistered person, they cannot act independently. They must ensure there's direct and appropriate supervision in place for each service they provide, and they also must keep records. So again, no change to those obligations, but worth reiterating them, as I said. There's some additional information provided around responsibilities. No change to the responsibilities of an unregistered person, but a registered supervising engineer must review the work at regular intervals and discuss any new issues or further engineering decisions that need to be made with the unregistered person. And they must conduct a careful review, including verification of any key decisions and calculations. Again, a bit more information around direct supervision in practice. Direct supervision is required at all stages of the provision of a professional engineering service, including at the start, during, and at the end of the delivery of the work. So, for example, for a design project, excuse me, a supervising registered engineer is required to establish the work plan and identify specific task, discuss the design and the engineering criteria, regularly review the work and progress reports, check various designs, particularly any alternative proposals, and on completion of the project, carry out a detailed review of the documents and completed designs before approving or certifying, as we mentioned earlier, the work that's been done. And again, might be worth having a look at the guidelines for this. There's a fair bit of information involved in this particular few paragraphs of direct supervision in practice information. Different registered engineers may concurrently or sequentially supervise different stages or components of the project. There may be components of a project which aren't professional engineering services and therefore not required to be supervised by a registered engineer. The level of supervision required by a registered engineer is a matter for their judgment. It makes the point, the documents make the point that whilst an unregistered person may gain more experience over time, they may be able to exercise some more independence and responsibility, but the level of direct supervision of an unregistered person, whilst it may decrease, the unregistered person must still be directly supervised. If a supervising registered engineer becomes unavailable, another supervising registered engineer must be available to supervise the work. And a supervising registered engineer may supervise an unregistered person who they employ, is employed by the business they work for example, a council, is a contract or a consultant of that business that for whom they work, or is an employee of a contractor or consultant that they have engaged. And again, makes the point that direct supervision may be managed remotely through virtual voice and video meetings, written correspondence, that is to say letters, emails or drawings, and also telephone contact. So a lot of effort's been put into the practice of direct supervision now in these guidelines, and I certainly hope that's helpful in determining what actually constitutes direct supervision. Additional information also provided in the area of record keeping expectations. The record should collectively provide evidence of the existence and nature of the supervision, demonstrate the supervisory involvement of the registered engineer in directing, overseeing and evaluating the professional engineering service. And there are some examples provided of the sorts of records that might be kept, including meeting minutes, file notes, emails and phone records, communications documenting major instructions and contracts. And fortunately, it makes provision for those records to be kept electronically or in hard copy form, and they may be part of an employer's record keeping and or quality management system. So a lot of information there provided around direct supervision, which is the first exemption. The second exemption, of course, is the prescriptive standard. No change to the to what a prescriptive standard actually means. A little change to the definition of a prescriptive standard, including a couple of important ones. There's no change to 3 of the 4 broad criteria, but one of them has changed significantly, and that is that whereas item 3 used to say that for a standard to be a prescriptive standard, it required no engineering judgment, it now says little or no engineering judgment. So there's a bit of a concession there on the part of Consumer Affairs Victoria. First of all, the standard must be in the form of a document, and that is to say something on which things are written, printed or inscribed, and which gives information. It can be a physical or electronic written record. It can also include a book, map, plan, graph or drawing, a photograph, any label or marking on another document, a disc, tape or soundtrack, any film, including a microfilm, a negative, tape or other device, anything whatsoever, in other words, on which is marked any words, figures, letters or symbols which are capable of carrying a definite meaning to persons conversant with them. So a little more description there over what the form of a document means. No change to the requirement that it state procedures or criteria. Significant change, as I said, around little or no choice or judgment being required. This does seem to be a concession because previously it said no judgment was to be required. It now says that an element of a prescriptive standard is that it requires little or no choice or judgment to apply the procedures or criteria it sets out, because by definition any prescriptive standard or approach sets specific actions or measurements or other qualifiable means as the sole means of complying with it. For example, a standard design template developed by a registered professional engineer requires no judgment if prescriptively followed. If the procedures or criteria require more than little or no choice or judgment to apply the engineering principles, the document is not a prescriptive standard. Therefore, to be a prescriptive standard, the document must provide a well-described and comprehensive approach that's easy to understand and follow. For example, a pressure vessel fabrication drawing, which includes materials, dimensions, and parameters that can simply be followed to undertake work in a particular circumstance. A prescriptive standard usually applies to a repetitive engineering activity that is routine, involves manageable risk, that's an inclusion, and has minimal scope for misinterpretation, or to an activity normally carried out by an engineering technologist. So again, a bit of a concession there in relation to the level of judgment required, and a direct reference to the role and services provided by engineering technologists. Clearly, and this probably didn't need to be clarified much more, but for a document to be a prescriptive standard, no advanced scientifically based calculations are required. They include the science, physics, and mathematics that we spoke about earlier. Advanced scientifically based calculations are distinguished from other engineering calculations by the level of engineering and mathematical knowledge required to calculate and interpret the output. So calculations required by a prescriptive standard must be able to be performed by a non-professional engineer who may have been trained in the use of such calculations. So again, a bit more clarity around the services provided by people and the use of people other than registered engineers, and the use of documents that are considered to be prescriptive standards. Some examples, again, useful. A calculation that would be regarded as advanced and scientifically based is, and I won't go into detail here, analysing power flows in a system involving the Newton-Raphson method of solving nonlinear equations, not something I claim to know anything about. A calculation that wouldn't be regarded as classified as advanced or scientifically based is the method for determining voltage drop specified in Australian Standard 3008 electrical installations, because it only requires substitution of known or specified values into a defined formula. So quite a useful distinction there between calculations that are classified as scientifically based and calculations that aren't. One has to be done from first principles, the other can be done utilising a familiar formula. So again, useful examples in the updated guidelines. Some additional information also provided around published documents and specific reference to Standards Australia publications. The point has been made that many Australian standards, and other published standards for that matter, may not meet the definition of a prescriptive standard, as they require more than little or no judgment and or calculations to follow the stated procedures or criteria. So I guess what that's saying is that just because a document has been published by Standards Australia doesn't make it a prescriptive standard. For internal documents too, and I can imagine a lot of our members work with these documents from time to time. For an internally produced document to be a prescriptive standard, it must have been endorsed by a registered professional engineer for application in the particular circumstances. So again, as with any published document, an internal document must meet the requirements for a prescriptive standard set out in the Act, in that it must state procedures and criteria and not require scientifically based calculations, and must not require the person using the document to make a judgment about whether it applies in a particular situation or how to follow the procedures or criteria. So it does sound like some review of any internal reference documents that are in use within engineering teams, within councils, consultants, or contracting organisations might need to be done. Again, some more information about decision making, where such a decision to use a prescriptive standard is likely to be a professional engineering service. The decision to use a prescriptive standards must be made by a registered professional engineer. Now that's it for the guidelines. That's it, I should say, for the guidelines and the practice note on prescriptive standards. There's a lot of information there. What we've tried to do is highlight the changes between the consultation documents that were circulated in September 2020 and the final versions of those documents that were issued in December 2020. All of those documents, as I said, are available from the website on that first slide. We'll come back to that in a moment. It'll be on the final slide as well. But just to recap how people will need to become registered. It's a co-regulatory model. The Business Licensing Authority, which is a division of Consumer Affairs Victoria, will administer the Act. They will monitor compliance of individuals with the Registration Act. They'll investigate complaints and they will prosecute offences. So it's the BLA that registers individuals. They will, before they do that, of course, they'll assess fitness to practice. That might include probity checks, inclusive of criminal history checks, and any other matters relating to fitness of practice before individuals can become registered. They'll also approve and revoke the approval of assessment schemes and maintain a register of professional engineers. The assessment schemes will be administered by assessment entities, and these organisations will determine an individual's eligibility for registration. So they're not verifying fitness for registration, they're verifying eligibility for registration. They'll be checking qualifications, experience, and in time, they'll be checking continuing professional development. I wanted to make the point here that whilst we certainly expect Engineers Australia and Professionals Australia to become assessment entities, I did want to make the point that IPWEA Victoria is considering becoming an assessment entity as well. Applications will be lodged shortly, and we're planning to lodge an application. And if that application is approved, then that's a service we'll be able to offer certainly our members, but also the rest of the sector as well. So please stay tuned for information about that. We'll certainly be announcing it if that's a service we're able to provide. Now, just in closing, in terms of commencement, we've spoken about this before. The Act comes into operation on the 1st of July this year, so that's only a few months away. Registration will be available from that date, and I'd suggest that not only will registration be available from that date, my expectation is that position descriptions will start requiring roles, certainly within local government, but within other organisations as well, any engineering service provider, to be filled by a registered professional engineer. So it's well worth considering becoming registered if you're looking to develop your career and perhaps look for alternative roles within the sector. Having said that, Consumer Affairs will be phasing in the operation of the Act by discipline over a 3-year period, and we've touched on this as well. This is confirmed by regulations that were released just last week on the 9th of February 2021, which confirmed that from the 1st of July 2021, all engineers are going to be granted an exemption, and then those exemptions are going to be progressively removed. And the interesting one for most of our members, civil engineers, is that their exemption from needing to be registered is removed from the 1st of October 2022, which is a little while away, probably about 18 months away, but there's a lot of work to be done at both an individual and an organisational level over that 12 to 18 months to work out which roles need to be filled by registered engineers, and of course whether the people in those roles meet the registration requirements. There's a little more coming. There's a code of conduct to be published soon. The regulations, as I said, were published just last week on February the 9th, but there is a code of conduct we're expecting over the next coming weeks or months, and we'll provide some more information on that once that is to hand. As I've said a few times, there are significant implications in this Act for individuals and organisations. I won't go through them again, other than to urge all of you to start having those conversations within your organisations, because my feeling is that for some organisations, there may be some organisational redesign, I should say, required, and that will obviously take some time. I did mention at the outset that IPWEA Victoria, in partnership with our principal corporate partner, CT Management Group, is developing a service to assist organisations to determine how ready or not they are for the introduction of the Registration Act. We'll have more to say about it over the coming weeks. We certainly intend to have it in place well before the 1st of July 2021. But in very simple terms, it involves a review of an organisation's, or at least the roles within an engineering team, a review of their position description against the Act, the regulation, the guidelines, and the practice note that I've touched on today, to help identify the roles that will need to be filled by a registered professional engineer, and by extension, those that don't. And also to provide some recommendations for alternatives where we think that might be appropriate. We're intending to develop it as a fixed fee service with regional fees for regional councils, in particular interface councils and metropolitan councils. Those fees are to be confirmed, but that's the direction in which we're heading. And as I've said, information will be available about that service as soon as we can make it available, once we've finished off another one or two pilot projects. We've done one, we're looking to do another one or two before we make the service available to everybody. So please do keep that in mind. We're here to help, and certainly happy to help if we can. That's all for now. As I said, information about all of these documents is available from the website you can see on your screen. I certainly hope this session has been helpful, and I hope that perhaps we can help you further when it comes time to work out how your organisation and the staff within it comply with these requirements. Thanks for listening.